Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Why It Matters. I'm Tracy Kronzak, Director of Innovation at Now It Matters, joined by my constant companion, Tim.
Hi, Tracy. It's so unnerving just be called constant instead of stalwart, but there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this thing called Google, and I just quickly did.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did stalwart synonym,
Oh, that's
and
nice.
I'm just going to
That's
start
good.
picking new words and throwing them
All
at
right,
you.
that's good. I'll just let you do that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually some really kind of ones that have interesting connotations. Like, what was one? Vigorous. That's a synonym for stalwart. Committed.
Don't use vigorous. Don't use vigorous.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's
yes. Do not. Do not. Please do not. I feel like Connor may need to just go redo that word out
Nope.
there. All right,
Committed,
great.
loyal, faithful, devoted, vigorous. Companion, Tim?
These are all synonyms?
Of
Yeah, of
stalwart.
stalwart?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
of the word stalwart.
Because it's like a mule, right? You know,
I guess. I don't
like
know.
a mule.
Are mules vigorous now? I'm wondering.
I mean, they are when they're going up and down the Grand Canyon,
I
right?
guess so. Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I guess they
In
are.
their own way.
Yeah, right, in their own way.
Anywho, I had an ex who hated it when I said anywho, so now I try to work that into my conversation,
All
like,
right.
because they get wicked mad at me, and I'm like, what's
Huh.
wrong with you? Anyhow, we are joined today by someone I had the distinct pleasure of getting to know through somewhat of a weird series of events. It was sort of like from the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. I met Jan Kaderly. And Jan is a consultant extraordinaire to nonprofits, someone I've had a great many soul searching, philosophizing conversations with. And Jan, you should introduce yourself, because I'm just going to gush about how many times I've just sat down with you and talked about life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah, those were heady, fun times, and I can remember several of those. You know what? Maybe we'll start to scratch on some of that. And
Oh God, I hope so.
Oh yeah. Okay, my name is Jan. We covered that. But I specifically focus on engagement strategy for nonprofits, and specifically really identifying what matters. And in fact, now it matters, why it matters, and what matters to your most important constituents, and getting real about that, not making that a routine affair, building really authentic relationships. And technology plays a part, strategy plays a part, and the really fun part that I think we are going to dive deep into is aligning people around that, because that is the hornet's nest of human behavior that either makes or breaks it all. So that's what I focus on.
Which gets at your business name, right? A-Line Strategy. So
Yes.
you're doing that
Yes.
to align. Okay. Right.
Oh
Jan,
my God. Sorry. It's never mind.
No, you got to go now.
No,
What happened?
I kept reading it as A-Line Strategy. So I'm like, yes, strategy can be, but
Align
you
strategy.
have to, yeah. Okay.
It's okay. Well, in fact,
I've been really sleep deprived the past 3 years.
The double meaning has always been a part of it, Tracy.
Okay, cool.
That's
I
like
always get the
it
undertones
versus
on the
IT.
double entendre. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification.
Well, there
now
you
I
go.
feel
Yeah.
totally foolish. Awesome.
Jan, you're one of the few people I know that talks about cowardice. And I appreciate that you don't shy away from that word. And so I want to start today's discussion by giving you a chance to talk about cowardice and why you think that's an important word.
Okay, so well, number one, it's a fun word. Typically, there's a lot of fun as you start to think about cowardice. I guess here's what I'm going to say, and it's important to establish it up front. It is not an accusation that does not apply to myself, a little bit of a double negative, meaning I am as much of a coward as the next guy. This is not a that finger points right back at this one, but specifically, here's how I think about it. And as I've started to think about it, I've started to recognize it pretty deeply in my life. But it's like, for cowardice to be an operative term, you typically have two conditions that apply. Number one, you have a sense of duty to something, like there needs to be an underlying moral code. This is why cowardice was typically, you heard a lot about it in like the 16th century, 17th and 18th century, like where you had like really strict religious doctrine.
I was going to say, is this the Calvinists? Are you taking it back to the Calvinists?
It goes way back. Like when you do research on the word cowardice, you will find it in religious courts and military courts, where you have very strong underlying doctrine that everybody agrees this is how we comport ourselves. So there's this underlying code that is known and accepted within a community, so that when someone doesn't live up to the standards that everybody has recognized and accepted, that's the cowardice. Like the personal weakness breaks the bond of what everybody expects from the group. So, usually it's soldiers that have fled in battle, or, someone that did not live up to their, religious doctrine. So that's typically and then that's the old version of cowardice that you would see a lot of usage on. And then, of course, in modern days, it's usually reserved for terrorists or people that we want to find morally reprehensible. But I think the common definition would be where you have this underlying code that we owe something to ourselves, that we owe something to a cause, and then we fail that. The second condition is that we fail it, and we fail it in big ways, in little ways, and we fail it out of a sense of weakness or fear. And the thing that is the most common of all, like it is almost just baked into the sauce of being social people, is that we back down from things, big things, little things that we think are important, because of fear for our reputation, and because of a fear that we might offend or, disappoint or rock the boat, blah, blah, blah. So there's just like baked into the sauce of almost daily life are a lot of, what I think the really provocative opportunity around thinking about and talking about cowardice is to make those concessions like active evaluations. Like, I'm going to give in on this because of this, or you know what, that's not worth giving in on. I'm actually going to push that. I'm going to make us a little bit uncomfortable here. It's worth it. So to just take it out of these kind of unwitting, appeasements that just kind of get baked into everything, and make it an active evaluation. But to make the idea that we don't even ask and that we don't even try, like, let's go back to the underlying sense of purpose. What are we doing out of fear and weakness, and make that something that's really, make that a dialogue with ourselves and others. So I think that's fun.
Does that mean that, no, that is fascinating. Does that mean that an act of cowardice is just avoiding the sense of duty and the code of conduct altogether? So if
you've lost it, or it might have become dulled. It might have become dulled to just what becomes the price of admission to a social group, to an organization, to whatever.
That's exactly where I took it in my mind was, this is a long way of describing organizational politics and culture.
Can be.
I went on a tear recently and I can't remember what room I was in. So, oh well. But I was like, yeah, so I can describe corporate IT and corporate IT service in, a paragraph or less by saying you create a cult of personality around a leader that then becomes like the rally point for organizational politics and culture that makes it think that everything's being different when in fact you're just repeating the same stuff with different labels and making people conform to unrealistic expectations of what is supposed to be delivered unto them by virtue of their participation in the culture and in the organization in the first place, and actually doing longitudinal harm by creating in and out groups that are closely aligned to that cult or personality or not.
I would agree, Tracy. I think it is like, I think the most interesting manifestations, and the ones that are probably most like tangible in people's lives, are, what you have to do in order to get by or get ahead, or, the make it, if you're successful, make change in an organization, or more likely than not, all the ways that you're not making change because you need to bend on to the side of security.
Yep.
Or what, however that plays out. There's probably any number of expressions that are overt or subtle to this. But my goal would have it be active, make that an active dialogue. Forgive the dogs if you guys hear that. So,
Mine just showed up on the other recording that we did this week. So like, I was like, forgive the dog. She's barking.
Forgive the dog.
Yeah, Jan, I'm curious where you see this in the work that you do with clients in nonprofits.
Yeah.
And how do you do you bring that word into the contract with you, like when you're working with nonprofits, or is this something that you think, I mean, you and I have talked about this as the background for other things. So just curious, like how that fits with your work.
I think I would, in terms of my work, it's interesting. I would say I've landed on this as a concept, mostly as a, like, going deeper with what I think, TikTok, we don't have many years, what do you want to get said before you ain't talking anymore? And, where do you think there's a valuable, contribution to a dialogue? So I kind of gravitate to this as a concept because it is, I would say it infuses my own life in the sense that, there are many ways that I hold back on my own potential out of fear. And I, in the time that I have left on earth, I don't want to be doing that. I don't want fear to hold me back from something that I think is valuable to offer the world. I think that applies to, and that applies personally, that applies professionally. I think that this applies, the concept applies also at the organizational level. So I would say, as I've been more deeply reflecting on my life and my work and the value that I can bring to my clients, I would not have it be it might be a provocative thing to talk about, and you can have some thought pieces around it in the backdrop, but I would say more directly, it infuses the notion of what is not being talked about here that is holding you back.
Yep.
What, it infuses things like, what are your sacred cows that are like, it leads to the bowing to a sacred cow. It leads to all variety of tensions within an organization that get kind of swept under the rubric of, say, culture and politics, that need to be teased out and kind of put before the light of day, diagnosed and treated. Like, it is about kind of uncovering, going beyond the generality of what we would define as kind of our effed up, situations, to like being really steely-eyed and honest about what is driving a malaise, what is driving this middling quality that you in some way know that you're suffering from, that is holding you back in some way. And then as it relates to technology, technology can easily become, oh, technology is going to be the thing that gets us beyond, our shitty situation. This is going to be the thing that makes us our ideal selves. And so you put so much money into it. It is bright and shiny. There's so much marketing dollars spent on describing it that it can, like technology can become that thing that is going to make you this ideal self professionally, organizationally, collectively, whatever. And yet at bottom, I think that is a ruse, and if not, and not just a ruse, because underneath it, you still have this behavior change. You still have potentially the same stuff that is going to hold you back that you really weren't. The reason you went to technology as a solution is because you weren't dealing with the underlying problem in the first place, potentially. And, and so my kind of approach that, the people that work with me, they love it. The ones that don't, they would hate it. But it is above all bare knuckled honesty around, what is holding you back. And maybe, and then if you get real on that, then maybe technology can move you forward. But if you don't, you've just wasted a lot of money and you're still left looking at each other, the same people that have the same problems. Now with just a lot more money spent and a lot more complexity, and well, shit, I guess we disappointed ourselves again.
Do you find, oh man, like where my mind went on that is boggling, because you can replace technology with a lot of terms and still have the same discussion, right? Do you find in your work that folks having a name and a description of this concept is relieving to them? Like they're able to sort of like, I think about when I'm training my dog, right? At some point or another, I will have to just like lay her down and hold her down and be like, there is like me and then God, and that's life. And she fights it for a minute and then she just relaxes. She's like, right? Do you find people are open to this? Do you find that they find relief in this idea? Or do you find that you have to kind of take them on a journey?
I would, and I would not talk about cowardice to a client. It's almost like, I almost think of cowardice like other concepts like belief or confidence, where once you become aware of your lack of it, it reinforces the problem itself potentially. So like with confidence, oh gosh, I'm not confident. Oh, how do I get confidence? Like the self-awareness of the problem leads to a greater impact of that problem. Belief, oh my God, I can't believe in that. But yet, so once you become aware of the lack of belief, it reinforces itself. So I would be very careful about talking about cowardice with someone in the sense of it could become a reinforcer of the condition. I would be oblique.
You deepen the groove on the record rather than skip the needle out of it. Yep.
So I would almost talk about I would go in through what are the trappings that you would see. Like, oh, are you, I would go into, are you indecisive? Are you favoring, are you trying to appease people versus trying to get them to support you? Or I would go into the behavioral trappings of it. From an organizational perspective, I would say, what are the conversations that you're not having that you need to have? How are you, and how many ways are you kind of hiding behind a conformity of practices in your peer group, best practices say, versus doing something that is unique to you? So I would go in through what I think are like, where you've got the important tension, the important inflection points that either, if you're choosing one over another, I mean, it's all generated from whoever you're talking to, but I would go in through the behaviors, because that's what people see and know. The awareness of an underlying condition can be very, I would imagine, not everybody's up for that.
Yeah. Do you find that those are common in your clients? Like, do you see some of the same ones happen frequently? Like, do clients avoid the same things when they're trying to, like, when they're sacred cows or conversations they don't want to have? Are those similar client to client, or are they pretty
Say,
unique?
I mean, it's human nature, right? Like I would say that people, I would say, well, I am lucky. People that would work with me would be probably braver than most, because if like people, for folks that like to hide behind a generality or want to feel good about an outcome versus, actually use it to like I have my client base would be very biased towards people that rock the boat, that are pretty open. My communication style is very transparent, if not a little transgressive. So just that in of itself would separate them out. But I would say though, regardless, so my clients say the CEO, the COO, whatever, those are typically very kind of, they're not afraid of disruption, but the things that it feels like many organizations struggle with in the sense of not dealing with underlying tensions between departments, between like even managing the balance of the security of meeting an annual revenue goal versus the potential losses of long-term growth. Like it is all of the ways that you hide the underlying tension versus surface it and deal with it. And then the human nature probably on top of that is the insecurity of, can I manage that problem? If I, it might be easier to hide it if I don't feel like I can manage it, so, and then how conflict averse are you as a person? So, the human nature is probably 90% of the whole thing.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I think that's one of the reasons that we've worked together from our first conversation. Like, it's been pretty natural. I think that's because as we look at technology, we've moved from a bits and bytes and configuration of technology model to a humans are the other half of systems. And how do you configure humans so that they know how to work well with systems? And interestingly enough, a lot of the work that we end up dealing with is some of the same things, conversations people don't want to have, and our way of sourcing that out is using the technology to create the cadence and roles so that those conversations happen predictably. And I think it's interesting to just see those two pieces work together.
I have to ask, like, we're talking about technology here as the center for this conversation. Um, and I completely agree. Like, technology will not save you, period. It will not. Although there's a lot of marketing out in the world that will convince a person otherwise. Have you ever been asked to do, DEI consulting or talked to organizations? I mean, because what you're describing is so true of talking with another person or organization about, like, when they show up and they're like, golly, we have a leadership team that kind of all looks the same. And we have, problems retaining staff that don't fit what seem to be a very homogenized place culture. So, I mean, there's so many possible centers for this way of thinking. Like, I have to ask, have you ever helped an organization through a DEI journey using this framework?
And that's, I took a framework, maybe at this point, it's like a series of questions that I keep asking myself and kind of stumbling on to the next, thought about it. But no, but that is really interesting, Tracy, in the sense of how, the tentacles that it can have to unearthing. I would say this, in terms of, and where you've got me thinking now, where it goes smack dab to what you're saying is in terms of conversations you're not having with yourself, the cost of admission to whatever, that social grouping is, to a corporate culture, et cetera, if you want to go that big with it. But I would say that once you start to strip away some of the dynamics, and once you start to kind of have the new conversation with new people, it does disrupt power structures, right? Like there is within a group, within an organization, a presumed sequence of who do you need to have the conversation with first as the gatekeeper to conversation almost, and then what is the sequence of conversations you can have afterwards, like just the power structure of conversation itself becomes a potential reinforcer. And so, and once you start to then you have given new people new voices and new perspectives on that issue. And I bet you they see it plain as day.
Well, I mean,
it hasn't become part of the organizational conversation.
It just seems so bang on, like needed, right? I mean, first of all, a series of questions. I feel like you're a fellow nerd. You'll understand this when I say this. That's sort of like Blade Runner, right? Like I'm going to ask you a series of questions to determine your humanity. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But, where my mind went with this, and I think what I'm trying to press on here is exactly to your point. I don't actually think it matters if you're innovating at the same time that you're doing it, because what's actually causing the change is asking the series of questions in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah. So like, I'm thinking of this as like, sure, we're going to look at this from a performance perspective of how you work around technology, but this is a performance perspective on how you can sort of address those huge elephant in the room conversations when it comes to talking about super uncomfortable stuff in corporate structures like race, ethnicity, diversity of gender and sexuality, and all the things that organizations say they want but don't know how to attain, right? There's even a whole nother side to this, and that is just human performance management, because you really don't know what's holding back your employees until you ask. And you have to be willing to sometimes hear that you as a manager are the person or the thing that's holding back your employees. And how many managers do you know want to hear that, right? Like, wait, we've looked at the root cause here, and the root cause is you. I learned this lesson very early on in my consulting career, that picking at these structures of power have huge implications for an organization. And I'll never forget the gig. I was like 9 months into consulting when one of my clients was like, yeah, we fired that person, so you're going to be working with this other guy now. And I said to my boss, I was like, what the hell happened? And he was like, oh, don't worry about it. You did your job. That's what happened. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, you were working with them and this employee was just fobbing off, and they knew it and they took care of it. So good job. I was like, wow, okay. So that, but the ramifications of what you're saying here are huge. And I just want to point that out, because where my mind goes is we need these tools, because clearly what we're all trying in all of these ways isn't perfectly adequate, because if it were, we would have a radically different sort of curve of everything from technology adoption to, DEI stuff.
And yes. And in terms of, I don't know how, as I listen to you, Tracy, I'm thinking I start to map it on to just the question of like human potential. And like that is the thing that is most, I believe, interesting and most accessible about the idea of cowardice. It is the ways that we hold ourselves back from our potential. And I think if you like, as an organization has potential. It has potential, by harnessing the collective potential of lots of professionals. And I think in terms of performance measurement, that little bit of measurement, that's another piece that like it is like what are the enabling conditions of human potential? And we've started to talk, there's this political element that really can kind of lead to some people having concentrated power, lots of people having less power. You've got the cultural dimension of needing to be liked and how that plays out. And then you've got this other, like the other mechanical piece that is baked into the sauce of every organization is measurement. And this is where I think technology, I'm really interested in getting you and Tim's perspective on this. Like, I was at an organization for 20 years, and at the end of every year, you've got your evaluation time, and you've set out to do something. Maybe a few adjustments were made along the way. If you're lucky, you've made those adjustments. Otherwise, here's your goal. The achievement of the goal, that became the basis of performance measurement. And I think that the question in terms of the really interesting piece of what is potential and how do we not just have middling potential in our time on Earth is like, is measurement helpful for that? And this is where I think technology it's a really big question to me, because it allows you to track and measure. It allows you to routinize. It allows you to align. It allows you to have complete transparency into all of that. And at its highest potential, you can say, we've tracked our impact, and I can do that as an individual. I can track my impact. And the big question I have is, is the tracking of the impact, like, okay, it's good to know you did it and you can prove it. And then you need to combine all of those impacts to lead to a greater impact at the organizational level, whatever. But I guess the thing I wonder about is the process and the project of tracking impact one that has us be more conservative in the assessment of what we can do, because we will have to prove it, because there will be complete and utter transparency around it. And it's not at all, humans have been doing really unbelievable things without technology. And I don't know, I worry, and I think about, I don't take it for granted that technology unleashes impact, not at all. I wonder if we hide behind impact as a way of proving what we've done versus doing more of what we might have allowed ourselves to do if we didn't have to track it.
You're almost positioning measurement as the hobgoblin of the BHAG. I can't remember whoever introduced me to the word BHAG, right? Like how they say like routine is the hobgoblin of small minds or something like that, right? It's sort of like measurement is the hobgoblin of the big, hairy, audacious goal. If I didn't have to measure everything, what would the audacity of my goal look like? That's what I'm hearing you ask.
And then combining on top of that, let's say, that bright, shiny thing, that big technology project that's going to make us our better selves, all of that allure, the needing to make good on the investment is just that is kind of
over a period of time that may not even be realistic. 3
Right.
months, next quarter, 6 months. Yep.
like I've got to prove that it was worth the $2 million that we sunk into it. Like the needing to prove is a very strong force. And I've been in the position of needing to prove it, which led to audacious goals, which then kind of leads to its own, like that all depends on what is the culture you're in. And
right, because we can't also be ensorcelled by our own audacity.
yes.
I mean, my thinking on some of that is that fundamentally organizations fall on a spectrum of viewing their team, their staff, the people that work for them, and the people that, to some degree, the people they serve as well, as either these are people that we are here to use to accomplish something, or we are here to accomplish something together. And our goal is to help these people accomplish this thing we're doing together. So you will end up in an organization that either uses you or that develops you. Like that's the simplest language that I can get to on it. And technology will only allow, it will allow either of those models to flourish. So when it comes down to using technology to manage performance, if the goal is to get every drop of efficiency out of somebody, and then if they leave fine because people are cogs and we got a big wheel, you can use the technology to accomplish that, measure it really well, and then use it to offboard and onboard really rapidly. So it can be really useful that way. It would be really hard, I think, for organizations that actually care about developing their staff to do that without adequate tools for measuring. And some of this is not all or nothing. So, I think that we went through a season of trying to understand what does it look like to work as a team together to accomplish doable goals in the short run. And what we found is that we did need technology and we did need to measure things, but not nearly to the degree that I think I thought as an economist with an econometrics background that we would need to do. It ended up being a lot more simple. Here's how we remember the 3 things we're working on this quarter. Like that was really, really important. What wasn't really, and then also having, I think this is where a lot of the measuring, it matters why you're doing it, which things you measure, and that you don't have to measure one thing. So we found is that organizations that are measuring a minimum, like here's the lowest thing that you need to do with this job or for yourself. If you haven't hit that, we've got a problem. That's actually really reassuring. And in fact, I just saw an article that Rachel Hands, who's on our team, wrote about how measuring actually helps people feel like they know if they're on track or not. So that's in an organization that cares about developing people, and that's because Rachel would never work for another kind of organization. But that is actually really important, but that doesn't get at the what's the most you could do. And I think that's where you get past the conservative, like, how do you just check the box and move on and know that you're done and take a nap when you are, but into how do I stay inspired to do even more? And will that more even be noticed if I do it? And so, and I think that without a way to measure that, and I would even say most organizations don't even have the skills to measure anything, much less tangible, and even more intangible, like qualitative, like is this person really pursuing our values and reflecting, some of that potential, and what is the feedback from others around this person and how helpful they are on the team. Like all of that, if you can't even measure the minimums, good luck measuring some of those higher, more important metrics. But what you'll see is that organizations that are out to develop people will have figured that out. And it may not be perfect. It may not be all tied into one centralized data platform or service or whatever, but they will have found ways to recognize that and to serve those staff. And you'll notice that those staff are heads and shoulders among those that you can hire out there. Like that is, if you aren't developing your staff, you will not retain talent. just that simple. So I don't think it's all or nothing. And I think, Jan, this goes back to why I feel like, we've partnered well together, is that there's more than one dimension to this, and that organizations that want to grow in their ability to develop staff need tools to do that. And they need an aligned strategy of culture behind that, or or they'll start measuring minimums, and it'll all digress into safety in risk metrics and how do I just get the next raise and move forward. And then you're out of, like, that is not the way that you innovate as an organization or even scale.
I will say one caveat, Tim, you also make it pretty clear what we're not measuring. And I think that's also important.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, Tracy. It's like, okay, the risk metrics are clear. The minimum metrics are clear. Like, what a fun topic that would be. What a fun workshop.
Well, we also have a to-don't list. Like every quarter we have the to-do list, and every quarter we have the to-don't list. And that's important because that completes the box in which you're acting. If you're one side of that box and then the other side of that box is unlimited potential, then the other two sides of that box are, what are you measuring and what are you not doing?
Yeah, and I mean, Tracy's saying that exactly right. At Now It Matters, we have a to don't, and I would say not everybody needs a to don't.
Wait, let me make sure I understand. The grammar aside, to don't, to do not. So okay,
ain't not gonna.
I ain't gonna. So this is like, just making sure I understand. This is the if we're going to pursue this, we will not pursue this kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is not for everybody. So I think we're talking and this is now like way into how Now It Matters functions. But one of the things that we've developed is, here are the things that here's what we're working towards. And like, it's just a few things that we're working towards at any given time. And then for people like our current innovation director and CEO, it is very important to have by the way, don't go chasing everything. And here are some things that we know we're tempted to go chase, and we are deciding as a team now to not go chase those things. And what we found is that there are a lot of people that have focus, and I so respect and envy that. I'm not one of them. I really, really crave like the next thing, and I really like that. And so it's been actually very helpful to have here's the to don't of the things that you could work on. Just avoid these right now. Maybe in the future we'll work on them, but for now we're not going to. And that's really given personalities like Tracy and mine some of the guardrails to make sure that we are staying in what we need to do. And maybe not every team needs those, but those have been helpful for us, I would say.
I was going to say, metaphorically speaking, on Highway 1 going north of San Francisco, there's a place that you'll reach, and the name of the shop is literally called Candy and Kites. And you're driving along Highway 1, and you're like, I'm here for the beautiful scenery. I'm here for whatever, the roadside antiquing. I'm here for the crashing ocean of the beaching waves and whatever. And then you see this place from about a mile away because they put a bunch of kites in the air and they put like all this like bright decoration on it. And you're like, oh my God, Candy and Kites. That sounds so good. And you go in there, and you come back an hour later and you don't know what happened to time, but somehow you have 4 kites and like 8 pounds of candy. And it feels great until you realize that what you were there for was the scenery, and you just spent all your money on roadside antiquing on candy and kites, right? It's like that,
I did not know where you were going with that, and you still landed it. Well done. I get it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that make sense, Jan, on the to don't list?
Yes.
Language aside.
Yes, it does.
Can I just say some really hysterical shit's happened while we've been recording that I don't think our listeners are going to be aware of right now. I have to get this out on First of all, like Tim went off of video for a minute because a pen just like freaking exploded all
I've
over
got
him.
ink on my cup right there, and then I drank from it, so I ended up with a black tooth and a big black spot right there. So thanks. And we had gotten away with it scot-free, and we're back in flow, but now I guess we're
No,
going to talk about it.
no,
So here we are.
we're not. We're just gonna say, I'm
We're
sorry. I just
talking
gotta,
about Tim.
Yeah,
I
there
just
we
gotta
go.
get it out. And like, just some crazy stuff's happened over here at the house, like the dog going in and out and molesting the cats and so forth. I'm just like, man, I'm just really trying to keep it together for this.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Brilliantly.
But I think, Jan, taking it all the way back, I mean, the question that I have is a follow-up, because this is the one thing I wanted to ask you when we started, but I think we've picked it apart the whole way through. And that is, what is it that makes technology for nonprofits so damn hard? And I mean, you see it everywhere. It's not, it's not hard just at Now It Matters. It's hard every place I've worked, every place I've sold. You're either dealing with sales cycle issues or implementation issues or this, that, or the other thing. So, I mean, I feel like we kind of answered it, but I'd love your, wisdom on it for our readers, because I want organizations listening to this to hear themselves in it so that they know there's a way out.
Right. So what makes technology for nonprofits so hard? But let's put a bow on it. I would say, what makes technology hard is what makes life hard. And it is, like, I think that's kind of obvious based on the nature of the conversation we've been having. Like, the thing that makes it hard is, not recognizing the truth of what you really wanted it to do for you, and potentially not understanding the substitutional effect you were hoping it would have, like, oh, if I did this, then, I won't have to deal with that. So thinking that it's going to solve a problem that it's really not, and that because it's never going to solve a problem that it's not designed to solve, which is what is the change that what problems weren't you talking about? We talked about that. What potentially, how the trappings of tech, getting caught up in the trappings of technology, the part of technology that is about standardization, routinization, predictability, getting caught up in that and taking your eye off the prize of where do you really want to go. And then and then everything that we have been talking about is part and parcel of just the behavior change of people. Right. So whether we're talking, it's kind of all part of a piece. The technology is just a thing. Technologies have been changing forever. And, we all still struggle with change. We all still struggle with how do we work together collectively. And we're all still struggling, both as people, as professionals, as organizations, that I'm going to bring it back to that. What is my potential, and how am I holding myself back? And technology can play a really interesting role in that, as either compounding the thing that's holding you back, possibly if you're really self-aware and, being honest with what those problems are, it can help you move through them. But I believe, and that's what I think is really interesting as a reflection, about cowardice is, we're surrounded by a middling quality. We live in a middling quality just to get, day in and day out, to get through the day. And I would say that when you think about your technology, just being really, really aware of, how do you hold yourself back? How can this help unstick you? And and I guess getting back in touch with that duty that you have. And this is, Tim talking about, now it matters. You are knowing you as a person, you are someone that you have a sense of purpose. You are someone that you just exude purpose. And so not surprising that when you talk about now it matters, potential is baked into the sauce because you have that underlying sense of duty. And you expect the people that work for you to have an underlying sense of duty. I feel so freaking lazy in comparison to your sense of duty. That's why I think about cowardice, is because I'm talking to people like you. It's like, God damn, Jan, you're such a coward. And so no, it's true. And so I guess that's the thing. That's what's really interesting about it, is just making that an active reflection. Like, get in touch with that sense of duty, and what's going to push you through it. And, make that a really, some things you're going to give on, as we all will. And then some things maybe you don't. And just, that potential, it is a gift to be born human. We're not born a rock. So
Jan, that was amazing. And then you made it amazing about me. And I feel similar to, it's so weird to hear you say that. I feel like when I talk to you, I feel like you have so much purpose and drive. And I'm like, man, I need that clarity that Jan has on, like, I need to do this, and you can make a list and then do the list. Like, it's just so I just feel like, and this
It's a pretty low bar, Tim. You might want to raise your praise. You can make a list and do a list.
Hey, no, this is what I want to say. For all of you
Thanks,
other
Tracy.
people out there who cannot complete a list, like, being able to go through a list and complete it is no small feat for those of us who can't. So, that may seem like a low bar, but it's.
I will say it's the type of list you make, Jan, that matters.
Yeah, I mean, lists have different quality. I guess I'm just sort of assuming that, but yes, we're definitely worth pointing out. So, right.
I am so glad you joined us today, Jan. There are people in this world whose conversations absolutely expand the mind, and thank you for going on that journey with us. And I'm really glad that you're out there working in the world the way you are.
Completely agree. Yep.
This was a lot of fun.
Yay.
I'm probably going to get fired by several clients soon.
I seriously doubt it.
Yeah, I think what they're going to do is figure out how to bring you in closer, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to listen to this and double it. Yeah. No, thanks for your time, Jan. It's always a pleasure. Really appreciate this. And we wanted you here because we actually think that this is an important word for others. And so, you and I have talked about cowardice before. I think that this needs more. It needs to get out in the world. People need to hear this. So thanks for.
It's not either or. Yeah, it's fear is the mind killer, but what you're talking about is much more nuanced. And thank you.
Well, thank you guys. This was a lot of fun.
I'm Tim Lockie.
I'm Tracy Kronzak, and you've been listening to Why It Matters.
Why It Matters is a thought leadership project of Now It Matters, a strategic services firm offering advising and guiding to nonprofit and social impact organizations.
If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, check out our playlists, and visit us at nowitmatters.com to learn more about us.